Hi, my name is Christopher Gardner. I'm a professor of medicine and a nutrition scientist at Stanford University. In March, I was invited to give a keynote presentation for the Lifestyle Council of the American Heart Association, and the topic was food and sustainability. It was not recorded. I thought I might record this on the side and give some folks an opportunity to see what I talked about. It was pretty well received talk, and so really excited today to be able to share this talk with you. Okay. So here goes food and sustainability, nationally and globally. Disclosure, I have received funding from Beyond Meat to do some research. Want to start out and say that American Heart Association is already on top of this topic. It's a 2019 publication about creating a sustainable, healthy food system. Cheryl Anderson and Ann Thorndike did a great job with this, came up with several stakeholders that we could be talking to that would enable this ability to move forward with a more sustainable food system. I'll get back to this at the end. Happy to have participated with several of the postdoctoral research fellows in our group here at Stanford around food. We did this for the atherosclerosis report, sustainable diets for cardiovascular disease prevention and management. Really happy that Christina Peterson was the guest editor for this particular edition. Concluded with a lot of research and references cited that the diet high in plant foods and low in animal foods would be more sustainable for a number of reasons. That would include health benefits, economic benefits, environmental benefits, some social and behavioral challenges getting this to go forward. Lots of different ways to think about sustainability. The talk that I gave focused on environmental sustainability for the most part. So that's where I'm going to head with this. And I thought I'd start with saying where AHA current position alignment is. If you go back to 2013, this American Heart ACC guideline suggested that when it came to dietary approaches for LDL cholesterol or blood pressure, the advice was to limit intakes of red meats. When it came to following the Mediterranean diet pattern, which was highly recommended, that one's lower in red meat, and following the DASH diet, which is another diet pattern that was recommended, that's low in red meat. In 2021, Alice Lichtenstein and Larry Apple led this fantastic group of writers to update dietary guidance from the American Heart Association. It came up with a great list, a top 10 of things we could do. Some of these are going to look very familiar to you, right? But a really nice addition that they had to this publication was a section on low environmental impact of our dietary choices and how that would align with health. So took this one quote out: reducing meat intake from current high levels will improve diet quality, result in more sustainable dietary patterns and lower carbon footprint. Now, what are we talking about for greenhouse gases here? A lot of folks talk about carbon dioxide, but in the livestock area and agriculture, methane is actually a big deal. And you may not have heard this, and maybe you have. It's really not the farts, it's the burps, right? So there's our cow. There's the four-stomach system of the ruminant animal. There's a couple little farts of methane coming out, but really it's the burps of methane. Okay, so again, not farts, burps. Now we know, are we all done? We have these 2013 guidelines that say reduce red meat. 2021 guidelines say reduce red meat. American Heart is already there. Now we know the difference between farts and burps in the cow. Are we done? No, I think there's much more to do here. So I wanted to talk about planetary boundaries going beyond just greenhouse gases. So Johan Rockstrom outlined this more than a decade ago, saying, beyond greenhouse gases, there's ocean acidification and eutrophication and biodiversity loss and chemical pollution. This published in Ecology and Society was cited 5,700 times up to this point and was built on by Dr. Stefan, who said, okay, instead of just red and green zones in these planetary boundaries, let's think about a green zone, a yellow zone, and a red zone. In this case, there's 4 areas. There's biodiversity and climate change and land system use and eutrophication. Right? This one was cited almost 4,000 times the last time I checked. And for those of you not familiar with an altmetric score, the citations are more about scientific people citing their colleagues. The altmetric score is how much press it got. Was it in social media? Was it in the newspapers, et cetera? So a score above 500 for altmetric is quite good. And some of these are in the thousands, but they had to be after, I think, 2012 or so to be included in an altmetric score. Look at this altmetric score for the Eat Lancet report led by Walter Willett. This has been cited almost 4,000 times. This is creating a global diet, a transformational health diet. And in this particular case, they highlighted 6 of the planetary boundaries. I've got them for you here. Here's the gases. Here's land use, water use, eutrophication from nitrogen and phosphorus, and biodiversity loss, suggesting that in 2010 as a baseline, we're in the red zone for 3 out of the 6. If we do business as usual and have the same amount of food waste that we currently have, we're going to be in the red zone for almost everything. So in this Eat Lancet report, they suggested that we could be more efficient with our food production. We could cut our food waste so that we're not losing so much that way. And we can make a dietary shift toward a more plant-based dietary pattern. And they go and show what happens if you do 1 of these, 2 of these, or 3 of these. And the goal here is at the end is if we do become more efficient producing food, cut our food waste, and shift to a more plant-based diet, we could return to greens and yellows across all the categories of these planetary boundaries. One of my colleagues on campus in the School of Earth Systems, Rob Jackson, published a paper with many colleagues from Stanford and outside in 2021 about red meat being a major concern for greenhouse gases. So in this Nature paper, they suggested we needed substantial changes in agricultural practice to be able to mitigate greenhouse gases and climate change. Climate change was discussed by the Conference of Parties in 26 as the 26th annual presentation. This was in Scotland. At the same time the COP meeting was going on, talking about this, Biden came out and said, yes, we actually need to focus more on methane. That's a potent greenhouse gas. But in the entire announcement, there was actually no mention of livestock or agriculture anywhere. And that same time, our Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, came out saying, you know what? Americans don't need to cut the amount of meat they're eating. We'll do this with solar and we'll do this with wind, which is just seems to be crazy if you look at all the people writing about this. The media asked not what was the elephant in the room, but what was the cow in the room? Why isn't anybody talking about agriculture at COP26? What is going on that this is missing from the conversation? To expand on that in a number of areas, here's an older paper, no altmetric score for this, but that cited thousands of times. Mekinen and Hoekstra said, you know, let's look at water use. That's a problem with agriculture. So we've got rainwater, groundwater, and wastewater. And they applied these to the different crops, and they came up with a system that can be used to measure the impact of growing different crops. Got folks like David Tillman here, who in 2011 has been cited, you know, more than 5,000 times. What about the global food demand, sustainable intensification of agriculture, and joined with a postdoc, Michael Clark. This has a nice altmetric score, been cited thousands of times. Global diets link the environmental sustainability and human health together. They're tracked together. If you're working for human health, you're also working for the environmental health. In 2018, Marco Springman wrote about this. Again, nice altmetric score, many folks citing him. Options for keeping the food system within environmental limits. This one also talks about shifting to a more plant-based diet. Here's Pora Nemecek writing in 2018, massive altmetric score. I think this may be one of the highest ones I've ever seen. Cited almost 2,000 times from a paper in Science. Reducing food's environmental impacts has to involve producers and consumers. And as a non-academic source, this New York Times bestseller drawdown listed 80 different steps we could take to reverse global warming, done by an environmentalist, entrepreneur, and a scientist, Hawken and Foley here. Of the 80 possible solutions in rank order, the third was reducing food waste, and the fourth was shifting to a more plant-rich diet. Hannah Rich is one of my heroes. She's taken a lot of the data generated by all those folks that I just cited and created an interactive database, Our World in Data, that you can find here in Our World in Data at Environmental Impacts of Food. She's got this interactive website here where you can add countries, you can add or take away foods. I'm just going to give you some examples here. So here is a pre-selected set of foods that's on their website. Here's the greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram of food. She actually even does this in multiple ways in terms of a denominator. So what are you thinking of? Are you thinking about per kilograms of food, per 1,000 calories, per 100 grams of protein? If you play around with this website, you can look at all those different components. This happens to be in terms of land use. Let me go back to the list of planetary boundaries. So if it is greenhouse gases, and you look at a set of foods like this, there's going to be some overlap in the middle. There's some plants that are highest in greenhouse gas emissions and some animals that are lowest. And I've actually left out fish, and I think I've left out some coffee and a couple things in making my red and green dotted lines. But take home here, animal foods, higher impact than plant foods. Next, let's move to land use. Same kind of thing. Certainly there's some overlap here. Not all animal foods are higher than all plant foods, but in general, an animal-based diet requires more land than a plant-based diet. If we go to water, yep, there's those nuts you've heard about. I do think the almond farmers are replanting their almond trees and using trees that grow almonds with less water. So yes, overlap. But in general, once again, for water use, animals higher than plants. And for excessive nitrogen and phosphorus, here's the eutrophication issue. Again, if you look at the animal foods versus the plants, animals higher than plants. We want to move to dairy milks. So here's one slide that puts everything on one slide: land use and greenhouse gas emissions and freshwater use and eutrophication. In each one of these cases, the dairy milk is much higher than the plant milk, the alternative milk options. So, when it comes to this food sustainability and planetary boundaries, who knew? Who knew that there were all these impacts of agriculture? Apparently, in the Biden administration, they're not mentioning it. Apparently, Tom Vilsack and the USDA aren't mentioning it, but oh my God, there is an incredible amount of evidence. With some urgency, agriculture, dietary habits need to be part of the solution here. It's in science, it's in nature, it's in the Lancet. Massive altmetric scores. So this is out there in the public. Thousands and thousands of citations. It's in the scientific community. Everybody seems to know this. Why isn't this a more urgent issue? I asked the AHA to be thinking about this, and they're already doing some great things, but I hope they'll do more. That last slide, I want to say, had quite a few white faces that were male on it. I do want to point out that there's a lot of brilliant folks around the world that are working on this. And just for an example, I want to call out the Lancet Commission, which actually was 37 co-authors from 16 countries. Half of them were women. Quite a few of them were people of color. So for the diversity, equity, and inclusion side of this talk, I wanted to make sure I gave a call out to how much this is being represented across the globe by a diverse group of excellent scientists. Okay, now back to this shift to a plant-based diet. It's out there, the evidence is there. We don't have to go vegan or vegetarian, but certainly a shift in consumption and thereby a shift in agriculture and production is necessary. Are people going to be happy with the food? Well, one of my most interesting sets of new collaborations has been with chefs and this idea of unapologetic deliciousness. I love this idea because it makes food more fun. And some of you who came to the American Heart Association's 2016 conference might remember that back then, 6 years ago, we actually invited to one of our panels, Greg Drescher, who's one of the VPs for the Culinary Institute of America, and Junjo Lee, who worked for the Hartman Group at the time and is a food ethnographer, gave a really great program on the alignment between public health and the food industry being driven by consumer demand. So we were trying to get some culinary wisdom inserted in here way back in 2016. I was tremendously honored to be invited to be part of the Menus of Change Scientific Advisory Board that put together a set of scientific principles aimed at chefs who were concerned that they were the victims of, oh, today it's gluten-free and tomorrow it's paleo and then it's keto and then it's vegan. And oh my gosh, people, come on, quit changing your minds. What are some scientific nutrition principles that really won't change, that us chefs can count on as being rock solid? What they wanted was a set of really good, nutritious and healthy food principles to go by. They wanted it to be environmentally sustainable. They wanted to follow social, responsible, and ethical guidelines. But as chefs, their job, their craft is to make things unapologetically delicious. And so the vision was the intersection of all that, which I like Greg Drescher's quote right here, the relentless pursuit of deliciousness at the intersection of health, sustainability, culture, and innovation. And all that led to creating this, the 24 principles of the menus of change. There are 12 food and ingredient and nutrition principles over here. These are 12 operator principles. So if you're operating a dining facility in a university or a hospital or a business, this is what the operator might think about. And combining these would make for an economically viable way to source, produce, and provide food to consumers. This is a path forward. As they were looking across the different principles, one of the central themes came to be reduction of meat. So serve less red meat, less often. See if red meat's overrepresented in your menu. And are there other delicious plant-forward approaches that you could use that are currently underrepresented in your menu? And a theme they came up with was something they call the protein flip. I really like this protein flip idea. It actually started out as the dessert flip. They're trying to get Americans to eat maybe less sugar. Took a huge slice of, let's say, cheesecake with a little raspberry on top. And they said the dessert flip would be a bowl of raspberries with a little dollop of cheesecake on top. Wouldn't that be delicious and healthier than vice versa? And so when they applied this to protein, they said, think of the standard American plate that's got a huge piece of meat in the center of it and maybe some vegetables and a starch on the side. Maybe from a culinary and global perspective, we could be thinking about a farro bowl, some tacos, a stir fry, a salad, a pasta dish, where all of these were not vegan or vegetarian. They were plant-based. They were featuring, highlighting plants in the middle of the plate with meat as a condiment or a side or a small portion on the top. This has been really fun working with these chefs, creating these incredibly delicious meals, taking advantage of a global fusion of flavors and lots of cultures around the world that have a plant-based diet for the most part, and making this more available and increasing awareness of these options. So some of this boils down to a term plant-based, plant-forward. I think that the choice term for the day is plant-forward, not plant-based, with the idea that this emphasizes and celebrates, but isn't limited to plant-based foods. So we've got fruits and veggies, whole grains, beans, legumes, soy nut seeds, herbs and spices. There can be meat on here for plant-forward, but it's emphasizing and celebrating the plants at the middle of the plate. Having gone to multiple of these conferences, at one point, I was asked if I would do a protein 101. They said, oh my God, if we're going to switch to these plant-based foods, are people going to be getting enough protein? I gave an 8-minute talk at the very first, I guess it was the second Menus of Change conference. And it was a big hit. And then they said I could do 20 minutes. And then the year after that, they gave me an hour. And after doing a whole bunch of talks on protein, I was getting such a great response that I got some colleagues, some environmental scientists, and actually a food industry colleague to put together this paper that we published in Nutrition Reviews in 2019, trying to maximize the intersection of human health and the health of the environment, keeping in mind the amount and type of protein consumed and produced in the US. And so I went through the recommended daily allowance and the estimated average requirement, and I show that people in general think they need more than they do, and they think they're eating less than they actually do. And there's room to not be so obsessed with protein. So Americans currently eat, if you read the paper, about 90 grams of protein a day, which is almost double the recommended daily allowance. And I asked one of my colleagues to put together a plate that would have 90 grams of fruit in kind of the portions that people are eating right now. So 85 of the 100% of that would have been from animal sources. Here's eggs and dairy and meat. And only 15% is from plant. A few nuts. Americans don't really eat that many nuts. They don't eat that many beans. They eat a lot of grains. This isn't supposed to be breakfast because it have eggs on it. It's supposed to be the major sources of protein over the course of a day in the rough proportions Americans eat it. And given that this is just the main protein sources, this isn't a full day of calories. This is only 800 calories. Most Americans eat 2,000, 3,000 calories a day. Interestingly, if you read the paper, you'll see everything has protein in it. And everything has all 20 amino acids, even the plant foods. So you'd be getting much more than 90 grams of protein if you ate this and the rest of your calories for the day. But let's just start with this. So let's think about shifting along the lines of a more plant-forward diet. Let's take this 90 grams down by 25%. And let's take the 85 and 15 and make that 60-40. Let's switch 25 over to plant. So now we've got 25% less protein, 25% shift here. I left the grains as they are. I think we eat too many grains as it is actually. So I left the grain amount the same. I cut back on the eggs and the dairy and the meat. I bumped the nuts up to an ounce. I know they're high in fat, but they're unsaturated fats. I left it at just an ounce so that people wouldn't freak out that there was too much fat. And a lot of beans, a lot more beans, but this is actually somewhere between a half a cup and a full cup. It's not really that many. This actually ends up being almost 800 calories, like the last slide. To get your full caloric balance for the day, you'd be eating much more than this. And again, everything has protein in it. Most things a lot less than these main sources, but it would continue to add up. So you'd get probably more than 67.5 grams of protein here. So as we suggested that we model this 25% less protein, 25% shifted from animal to plant, what we got was we still exceeded the RDA, which already has a safety buffer, if you want to read the paper. When we shifted from 85-15 to 60-40, we pointed out that protein quality in plants is a lot higher than people believe. There really are no missing amino acids. They're present in some smaller proportions in plant foods, but they're all there. If you scale this up to more than 300 million people in the US, turns out working with my environmental colleague who joined us as a co-author, that 25% shift would lead to a 40% shift overall in greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. That alone, that one 25-25 flip would be 8% of what we pledged under the Paris Agreement for the long-term decreases in behaviors that would lead to slowing the rate of global warming. In addition to which we'd save 10% of water. 3.1 trillion gallons of water is what we estimated. And is there room for that kind of change? Here's a global perspective from the FAO on meat consumption in North America, all the way down to Africa. I drew a red line over here for the world. Oh no, here's our red meat consumption here, right? So here's North American red meat consumption above every other country. Here's the world's total and the world's red meat consumption. If we want to move up and include pork with red meat, as many people do in their definitions, okay, we really eat more red meat together, pork and beef, than anybody else. There is plenty of room here to cut back on red meat, not eliminating it, just cutting it back. And so I thought I'd show you a couple pictures of what this might mean. I think people sometimes oversimplify this into, wait, you got a steak on the barbecue and you might be asking me to eat a Mediterranean salad with chicken on it. Maybe I can do that, but that plant-based diet, isn't that just rice and beans? Isn't that all it is? It's not. That's not what we're talking about here. So think of 3 Mediterranean salads. Think of a chicken Mediterranean salad, a vegetarian one that has feta cheese, or a vegan Mediterranean salad. All these, I think, look pretty delicious. Here's shakshuka, a really classic dish, relatively inexpensive. The classic one has beef and eggs in it and lots of tomatoes and spices, fabulous herbs, and a blend of spices in that one. What if you just left out the beef and kept the eggs? That would be vegetarian. What about the vegan one? You could still have all the tomatoes and herbs and spices and global fusion of flavors. This one's kind of cute. What do you think? They sliced up yellow squash to fake the eggs. Okay, you don't necessarily need that, but I thought that was a cute attempt. How about tacos? Tacos, pretty friendly food. A lot of people like tacos, right? So you can have fish tacos. It's pretty innovative. Cheese tacos. I've eaten a lot of very delicious vegan tacos. Get some guacamole in there, some salsa, some black beans, lots of other things can go in there. All those are tasty. World Bowl. Oh, bowls are hot these days. You can do all kinds of creative, innovative, flexible things with bowls. So here's a Korean fried chicken. It's got a bunch of vegetables and beans and tofu in there. Here's a vegetarian one. You got some egg on top of your vegetables, and here's a vegan boodle bowl. All of these, delicious, unapologetically delicious. So I think if we keep that in mind, the shift can be easier. And then do we have strategies for this behavior change? I got to tell you about a class that I teach on the Stanford campus. I'm doing this started doing this with Tom Robinson, a pediatrician, and Eric Heckler back in the days when he was a postdoc. We proposed a class for undergraduates that we called Food and Society. We actually never presented any scientific papers. We took a bunch of popular books on food issues, and we took several documentary films about food. And over the course of 10 weeks in the academic quarter, we had them write an op-ed and try to publish it, do YouTubes for behavior change. They were blogging. Before and after the course ended, we conducted a survey to see what their habits were, and we actually published a paper on this. 3 of my colleagues, who were also teaching health-oriented classes, provided the same survey to their students. So we actually had a control group, and we said, okay, how about the folks who took our Food and Society? What were they reporting for healthful eating? They reported significantly improving their healthful eating when we actually never talked about health. We only talked about social, ethical, cultural, environmental issues about food and food production. And I got to say, this was career changing for me, because here I was with my nutrition science degree, getting NIH funding, running randomized controlled trials, publishing in medical journals, presenting at conferences, not seeing a lot of behavior change, go in and teach this class, put health on the back shelf or in the parking lot for a while, and talk about all the issues like animal rights and welfare, global warming, climate change, human labor abuses that happen in slaughterhouses and fast food workers. And the students became alive with conversation. They shared our readings with their family. They shared our readings with their roommates. They were incredibly engaged in this. I got to say, our study as a research study certainly had limitations. Students self-selected into our class. They self-reported their dietary behaviors. They probably decided if they said the right answers, they'd get a better grade. We admitted all this when we submitted the paper. We said there are many limitations to this study. I think the reason this was accepted for publication was that we were proposing a paradigm shift for behavior change. Instead of focusing so much on health as the motivator to change behavior, what if we think about many of the other factors related to food consumption and production? And I actually only taught the class so that we could publish the paper, but since doing the class the first time and publishing the paper, I've now been teaching this class for almost 15 years at Stanford. This is one of my most rewarding things that I do on our campus, as well as spinning off the Menus of Change, which was originally targeting the food industry. At their annual meetings, they would ask all the big food groups to come, and the chefs would explain where their heads were going, like this protein flip idea, trying to motivate the food industry to see that if the chefs are going to order all that food, they might want to be aligned with them. But we decided to do a spin-off called the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, and we now have over 60 different universities that have agreed to use their dining halls as living laboratories. So we've been doing behavior-oriented research in the laboratories. And one of those things was to repeat this classroom approach where we're focusing on food and society issues as opposed to food and health. So we did this again at Stanford with 2 other campuses from the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, and published that in Nutrients in 2020. So that would be a strategy for behavior change. So let me leave you with 3 take-homes from this talk that I've been giving on food and sustainability. One is, I do think the American Heart has been doing a lot moving in this direction of tying food for a healthy heart to food for environment and environmental sustainability. But I think, judging from the comments of Biden and Vilsack around methane that just came up at COP26, we could do more. American Heart could do more. Is the evidence there? Oh my God, there is so much evidence in here. And let's not just think about greenhouse gases, let's think of a range of planetary boundaries. It becomes even more compelling when you look at the full range. And let's stop obsessing about protein. Take advantage of these culinary innovations around things like the protein flip, unapologetic deliciousness. Think of chefs as maybe some new partners in institutional food settings like hospitals, at conferences such as ours at the American Heart Association, and universities and work sites. How can we get new partners in these efforts to make changes in food consumption and food production? And at the end of the day, beyond just health, I think sustainability could be one aspect of a behavior change strategy that would push people towards heart-healthy, plant-forward diets, as we've been trying to publish in the literature with some of our student-oriented papers. Now, how would you do this? Well, American Heart is already on the way. They published this back in 2019. Thank you again, Cheryl Anderson and Ann Thorndike. It means reaching out to these different stakeholders that are involved in driving the food system that's everything from production to consumption. So we already have some stepping stones within the American Heart for that. And we already have some guidance from the 2021 Dietary Guidance Update on low environmental impact. Thank you, Alice and Larry, for putting this together and putting this statement out there. We can build on this. Thanks to the postdocs who worked with me to put together this overview of sustainable diets for cardiovascular disease prevention and management. Great group of postdocs to work with. Again, there are health benefits we can focus on. So find those resources. Economic benefits that can come from this, take advantage of those. Many environmental benefits that I just shared with you today. And the ultimate change is getting the social, behavioral change to go on. And my plea today is that those of you listening will take into consideration some of these different angles. If these aren't practices or angles that you take advantage of already, consider using some of these. Let's do more studies. Let's get more evidence for this. And let's get American Heart to jump on and take a more active role in this and moving forward, because there is room for more improvement. Not talking about vegan or vegetarian, talking about a more plant-forward diet that's more sustainable. That includes everybody, as in these concentric circles. If any of the physicians at the conference want to look into this, or if anybody listening to this YouTube is physician health professional oriented, a great place to start would be this Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives conference. It's held annually in the Napa Valley. This is the last one I attended, February 2nd to 4th in 2022. There will be another one next year in 2023 about the same time. This is half science, half cooking. So the health professionals will listen to a science talk, and then they'll go and cook some simple plant-forward diet on their own and share the great food with everybody else. So, audience, there are no healthy people on an unhealthy planet. Food sustainability is a critical factor that lies at the intersection of human and planetary health. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something useful. Look forward to talking to you, since I'm doing this on YouTube, on Twitter, or at a conference, or somewhere else. Thank you again very much.